When you pray, do you assume God only hears your audible, your spoken words? Or does he also consider the quiet, the unuttered longings, that silent ache that just abides deep within your soul?
That's a question that really cuts straight to the heart of what true communication with the divine looks like. So many of us approach prayer as, a task. But the masters who've studied Psalm 5, they show us it's an art form.
Hmm.
Today, we're going to open up this ancient prayer and uncover David's profound teaching on really three core things: the careful anatomy of what makes a prayer effective, the absolute holiness of God, and then the comprehensive, unshakable defense promised to those who trust him.
Welcome to the Pilgrim's Rest channel. Our purpose is to introduce spiritual books that have been passed down through the generations so that every saint walking the heavenly journey may find rest, nourishment, and renewed strength here. And truly, Psalm 5, especially as has been illuminated by centuries of spiritual experience, provides just immense nourishment. It starts right at the entrance of our approach to God.
Yeah, we dive straight into the text, looking at chapter 5, verse 1, where David teaches us that the heart of prayer is not actually in the language we use. He speaks of two kinds of prayers, those expressed in words, and what he calls the unuttered longings, which abide as silent meditations.
I find it so powerful when the commentators say that words are merely the garments of prayer, not the essence itself. That frees us up, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, it suggests that even when we're too distressed or tired or just completely overwhelmed to formulate a coherent petition, the prayer itself is still effective. Didn't they cite the example of Moses at the Red Sea, crying out even though he hadn't spoken a thing?
Exactly. Scripture says Moses cried out, but he hadn't said a word. What was heard was that unuttered longing, the soul's deep distress. And that's precisely why David asks God to consider my meditation.
Consider.
Yeah, that word consideration is pivotal. It's not just asking God to listen. It's asking him to analyze the heart's true intent and to fill up the vacancy in the prayer, to supply what we may have failed to ask for in our own human weakness or despair.
So if the spirit of the prayer is right, God will essentially edit and improve and complete our request.
That's a wonderful thought. It really drives home that core insight. We have to cultivate the spirit of prayer, which is even better than the habit of prayer. It's a difference between just, ticking a box and genuinely seeking communion.
Absolutely. The goal is relationship. And if the spirit is right, the communication flows, even if it's just a sound. In chapter 5, verse 2, David refers to the voice of my cry.
Right.
Even when words fail, that cry has a soul-moving eloquence to God. The text reminds us that to a loving father, a child's cries, even if it's just wailing, are music his heart cannot resist.
But the cry isn't just noise, is it? What gives that cry its spiritual efficacy, its power, is the address. David doesn't cry out to some distant abstract deity. He addresses him immediately as my king and my God.
Yes.
Those little possessive pronouns, my king, my God. That's the pith and marrow of the plea. It establishes a covenant relationship, demanding an audience and demanding action. It's a declaration of exclusive reliance. He resolves, for unto thee will I pray, a resolution to seek God and God alone. It's like he's saying he's finished trying to draw water from, broken cisterns.
Yep.
He's leaving those self-serving empty pursuits to the godless.
That brings us to this really crucial practical application in chapter 5, verse 3, the timing and technique of devotion. David resolves, my voice shalt thou hear in the morning. And this is highlighted as the fittest time, with the argument that an hour in the morning is worth 2 in the evening.
It speaks to that principle of giving God the first fruits of your day, of setting the trajectory. The tradition holds that prayer should be the key of the day and the lock of the night. But I think a modern listener might push back.
How so?
Is morning the only acceptable time? For someone who works in night shift or struggles with chronic illness, how do we apply this principle without it becoming a burden?
That's a really vital clarification. The underlying spiritual principle isn't about the clock, it's about the priority. We have to give God our best, our clearest, our most
Undistracted time, exactly. If your mental clarity is at its peak at noon, well, then noon is your morning prayer. But if we're giving him the last scraps of our energy when we're already falling asleep, we haven't given him our best.
precise.
And that leads to the next depth in that phrase, I will direct my prayer unto thee. That doesn't just mean, turning toward heaven. The deep insight here is in the Hebrew root. It means to arrange.
To arrange.
Yes, it's the technical word used for the priest laying out the wood and the sacrifice upon the altar in the morning.
So David is saying he will approach God meticulously, that he will marshal up my prayers.
Yes. It means gathering his thoughts, his intentions, his needs, and carefully arranging them to be acceptable before the Lord. It stops prayer from being this rushed, mumbled affair where we just stumble through 5 quick requests. We have to actively put forth all our powers to pray acceptably. Honestly, that realization alone is convicting. How many times have I realized I've given more careful arrangement to my grocery list than my morning prayer?
You and me both. We prepare for everything else, but we often treat the greatest audience of all with the least preparation. And there's a final piece to that sequence, the essential follow-up. And we'll look up.
Right.
This means I will look out for the answer. After the prayer is offered, we must have hopeful expectation.
And that is often where we fail the most. There's a powerful spiritual warning here. We often miss the sweetness and efficacy of prayer due to a lack of careful meditation before it, and then a lack of hopeful expectation after it.
So true.
If we sow the seed of prayer but are too idle to seek a harvest, how can we possibly expect the blessing to come? We're basically treating God like he's incapable of answering.
Okay, so once we realize how carefully we must approach God, with genuine spirit, with dependence, with preparation, we can understand why David feels so confident about his enemies. He's appealing to a God whose very nature forbids wickedness.
That's the perfect transition to the second major theme, which is the absolute holiness of God. This covers chapter 5, verses 4 to 6. David immediately establishes this theological foundation in verse 4, "For thou art not a God that hath pleasure in wickedness, neither shall evil dwell with thee."
So he's appealing to God's unchanging nature. He's saying, my enemies are inherently displeasing to you, therefore you have to intervene.
Exactly. And this illustrates the solemn truth of God's hatred of sin and the idea that God will not afford sin even the meanest shelter. The old commentators have a stunning analogy here.
What's that?
They say, Christ will not live in the parlor of our hearts if we entertain the devil in the cellar of our thoughts. It means God is comprehensive in his exclusion of evil.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
And that matters to the believer because it means God is inherently on the side of the righteous. His very existence is an argument against the wicked. This leads to their fate in verse 5, where they're called fools.
And that's not because they lack intelligence, right? It's because their great sin is the greatest folly. Sinners are fools written large because they willfully choose a path that leads them to be banished from the court of heaven.
And the depth of God's reaction is, well, it's terrifying or maybe comforting, depending on where you stand. It says, thou hatest all workers of iniquity. This isn't just a little dislike or mild disapproval.
No, it's a thorough hatred. It should serve as a wake-up call to all of us, demonstrating just how awful and disastrous a thing it is to incur the hatred of the Almighty.
And crucially, this judgment isn't just for wicked deeds. Chapter 5, verse 6 shows that words are judged just as surely.
Thou shalt destroy them that speak leasing. Now, that word leasing, it just means lying. Liars, even if they escape man's law, will not escape the law of God.
And then it says, the Lord will abhor the bloody and deceitful man.
And that word abhor, it's even stronger than hatred. It means he recoils from them in revulsion.
So David establishes the holiness of God and the necessary fate of the wicked. This just sets up such a sharp contrast in the next section, where David talks about his own personal approach to that holy God. How can a flawed, human righteous person even stand before this perfectly holy God?
That's the essential theological hurdle. He begins chapter 5, verse 7 with that beautiful contrast. But as for me, unlike the wicked who are justly banished, David will come into God's house. But notice, he doesn't claim merit. That is key.
Right.
His approach is not based on his own performance, but in the multitude of thy mercy.
And that is the essential insight for every believer today. We rely entirely on the vastness of God's grace. It's beautifully illustrated when the masters say that God's judgments are numbered, but his mercies are innumerable.
Just think about that difference. When God judges, it's measured and specific to the offense. But when he gives mercy, it is limitless, unquantifiable, and overwhelming. And David responds to this overwhelming grace by worshiping in thy fear.
Which isn't a groveling, slavish dread.
No, not at all. It's a holy veneration, a deep, worshipful reverence for his majesty.
This humble approach is then immediately followed by a profound plea for guidance in chapter 5, verse 8. Lead me, O Lord, in thy righteousness. Why does David, a righteous man, still need to be led? It shows his complete dependence.
It casts the righteous man as entirely dependent.
I don't see it.
a little child or a blind man needing a hand at every single step, and he emphasizes that he wants God's way, not my way. The goal is to see God's way straight before my face.
Hmm.
That realization that we need constant, moment-by-moment divine leading is a happy sign of grace. It means we finally learn to give up our own flawed paths.
And this reliance on divine leading is especially necessary because the wicked aren't just wandering aimlessly, they are actively destructive. They pose an immediate danger, which brings us to the startling imagery in chapter 5, verse 9.
Verse 9 focuses on the danger of wicked speech, and it's captured in that powerful and frankly repulsive figure. Their throat is an open sepulchre.
An open sepulchre. That comparison just graphically portrays the utter loathsomeness and corruption of the wicked heart. A sepulchre is a place of death, of miasma, of pestilence. An open one steams forth filthy conversation, spreading corruption and destruction.
The wickedness of the heart literally exhales through their mouth. They use their words to kill.
It's the ultimate warning against slander, isn't it? The wicked man with that open sepulchre actively seeks to destroy your character. But here's a comforting insight that's often overlooked.
What's that?
Even if our character is temporarily buried by slander, the text assures us of a resurrection of character. On that final day, then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun, vindicated completely, even if they suffered under lies in this life.
That's a beautiful thought. It also warns us against the danger of the smooth tongue. They flatter with their tongue. The enemy doesn't always roar. Sometimes they lick. The wolf doesn't snarl at the lamb before the attack. He flatters it, enticing the unwary with oily words before preparing to strike.
We have to guard ourselves against that.
And that leads us inevitably to the most difficult verse in the Psalm, chapter 5, verse 10, dealing with what are often called imprecatory prayers. David calls for the destruction of the wicked, and, the modern reader often finds this controversial or even unchristian.
That's a crucial distinction we need to make. What exactly does the term imprecatory mean in this context for the modern believer?
Imprecatory prayer means calling down God's judgment or curse upon the wicked. However, we have to understand the context entirely. David is not speaking out of personal malice or revenge. He is speaking ex officio.
Ex officio.
As God's mouth, like a judge condemning a known criminal, upholding the law.
So the key distinction is that the judgment is against those who have rebelled against thee, meaning God's enemies, those actively fighting his authority, not David's personal rivals over some petty disagreement.
Precisely. These expressions are not personal vendettas, but an assent of righteous souls to the necessary justice of God. A believer can assent to the coming curse, not because they hate the individual, but because they have an intense earnestness of concern for the glory of his God.
So it's about applauding the righteous judgment of the Almighty, demanding that holiness be upheld. If we truly love God, we must desire his glory to be vindicated, which means sin has to be condemned ultimately.
Yes, exactly. And the song concludes, so fittingly, by transitioning from justice to joy in the final verses, chapter 5, verses 11 and 12, focusing on the eternal privilege of the joyful and protected believer. Chapter 5, verse 11 presents joy as the established privilege of the righteous. David contrasts the wicked, who laugh first and weep ever after, with the believer who may weep now, facing trials, but will rejoice eternally.
In that final promised day, when the wicked are howling in fear, the righteous shall shout for joy.
And this holy bliss is built on the most secure foundation imaginable. It is joyful in thee. The eternal God himself is the wellspring of our bliss. Our peace and joy are rooted not in circumstance, which always changes, but in him who never changes. That's what makes the joy eternal and unshakable.
This leads directly to the absolute assurance of the divine shield in chapter 5, verse 12. Thou, Lord, wilt bless the righteous.
And the spiritual writers describe this promise as having infinite length, of unbounded breadth, and of unutterable preciousness. It is not a small promise.
Not at all. And the defense itself is comprehensive. With favor wilt thou compass him as with a shield. This refers to those vast ancient shields, the ones that were as extensive as a man's whole person, designed to surround him entirely. It's the idea of total 360-degree protection.
That divine favor acts as armor upon armor, defending the whole person and preserving all the other graces within the believer. The righteous aren't just protected, they are simultaneously crowned with favor, which is at once our glory and defense.
They are encompassed by blessing, wearing favor as both a shield and a crown. That's a powerful final image for the Pilgrim's journey. So we return to where we began, with the careful anatomy of effective prayer. If preparation and that marshaling of thoughts lead to effective prayer, and hopeful expectation leads to answered prayer, how will the practice of setting aside your best time, your morning, your noon, whatever is your clearest moment, to carefully arrange your heart before the Lord. How will that change the course of your day?
That arrangement, that holy marshaling, that is the key to unlocking true communion.
Thank you for listening to the Pilgrim's Rest channel. You are welcome to like, comment, and share this deep dive with fellow pilgrims around you so that we can support and encourage one another on this journey of faith. Hope to see you next time.